Welcome to Ethiopia, the land of origins. Within this 40-minute presentation, you will see unfold a vast land of rocks, dirt, steep mountains, trees, wild animals, volcanoes, historic churches that go back to the 4th century. Most especially, you will see a country that has earned its title as the cradle of culture. Ethiopia has given birth to so many things we enjoy today. Thank you for joining us. Christianity came early to Ethiopia. In fact, some historians say it was one of the first nations to officially adopt Christianity in the early 4th century. The Acts of the Apostles describe the baptism of an Ethiopian eunuch shortly after the death of Christ. Eusebius, the first church historian, tells of how the eunuch returned to diffuse Christianity and its teachings in his native land of Ethiopia. Such a beautiful church. The Orthodox Church dominates the religion of Ethiopia. The Mercado, the largest open-air market in Africa, sells everything under the sun, from kitchen spices to building materials. We now venture to the historic city of Bahadir and the largest lake in Ethiopia, Lake Tana, which holds all kinds of water creatures, especially the hippopotamus, and locals that stroll across its surface on grass boats, and islands holding convents and monasteries. These historic grass-roofed monasteries hold some of the most beautiful paintings and murals of any monastery in Bahadir. The vast Lake Tana is fed by 4 major rivers and is also a major feeder of the famous Blue Nile River that we will soon see. Numerous islands, this lake is well visited by both locals and tourists alike. Coffee. Ethiopia's biggest export is enjoyed with incense ceremony. And as we approach the impressive Blue Nile, we are greeted with a comforting pastoral image of hay and cattle. The first capital city of the Ethiopian Empire, Gondor, is often referred to as the Camelot of Africa. Founded by Emperor Phylaces around the year 1635, no longer would the royal family wander the kingdom in royal tents. Christmas, a time for animal sacrifices and caged tourists. But Deber Berhan Selassie, the light of the Trinity Church with its 16th century paintings and frescoes, always impressive. Once a royal home, now a chapel, used for large baptism ceremonies during the Christmas and Epiphany season. An Ethiopian Orthodox Christmas Divine Liturgy is always inspiring, but now we head north into the thin air of the Simien mountain range with the highest peak at 15,000 feet. This mountain range came to birth millions of years ago. This northern territory is part of the Great Rift Valley. Volcanic activity that started millions of years ago continues to this day and has been the cause of these inspiring sights. The great Gelada baboon, often called the bleeding heart baboon, live at these impressive altitudes. They live in large communes and eat the roots of plants found on the plains, while living at night in caves along the walls of the nearby cliffs. They have come to see tourists as non-threatening. Consequently, we're able to get really close to them. The Great Rift Valley is the name given to the continuous geographic trench that extends almost 4,000 miles from Lebanon to Mozambique in southeastern Africa. But today, the most impressive sight of this rift is here in Ethiopia. You can see why today they call it the Grand Canyon of Ethiopia. We fly now to Lalibela, the city founded by King Lalibela in the 12th century, and a place of continuous pilgrimage since. You will see why we came here. It's 12 monolithic rock-hewn churches. Listen now to our guide.
The church, and it is St. Andrew's cross from where we are, the X, but from another angle it is Greek, the plus. In 2013, I was in Nicosia. I was in Cyprus. Have you guys been to Cyprus?
No.
Yeah, and I was there sponsored by World Federation of Tourist Guide Association to train the trainer guide, train the trainer guiding techniques and all that, the ethical aspect of guiding. So this was a presentation I made for colleagues who came from Czech Republic, Austria, and even from Scotland. So they say, why cross in Ethiopia? Because their understanding was Ethiopia being a Muslim nation. So I told them that we Ethiopians became Christian since the 4th century. And even though we are close to Somalia, Sudan, Djibouti, and the like, we Ethiopians remain Christian since the 4th century, and this is one proof I came up with.
Through the centuries, priests would come on pilgrimage to Lalibela and often would never return home. Many of these priests were buried along the inside wall of the famous St. George Church, as you see here. And you'll notice later and along this presentation, priests can be identified with their white head wrap, whereas monks wear a yellow or an orange headpiece, as you'll see coming up. We head now up into the steep mountain area outside Lalibela, into an agricultural hamlet dotted with juniper trees, to Yem Harin Christos Monastery Church, tucked inside a cave that has preserved it since the early 11th century. This monastery church predates any of those rock-hewn churches of Lalibela by almost a century. Beautiful paintings can also be found along its walls. Pilgrims would stream toward this monastery and never return home. Many of them are laid to rest in the back area of the monastery, where they can be seen till this day. Another cave church monastery outside Lalibela is occupied with faithful Ethiopian Orthodox laity. But on several occasions, we are greeted by its priests, who shows us the church's historical treasury and even gives us a priestly blessing once he found out that we were Catholic priests. Right. Yeah.
የካቲት 16 ቀን ቤታችን የጸለየችውን ጸሎት ተቀበሉ። ቤታችን የለመነሽው ሁሉ ቤተክርስቲያን ሲሰራ ሁሉ በአንቺ ስር ያለሽ ሁሉ እኔ እቀበልሻለሁ፣ አንቺም ስለጠራ ሁሉ እቀበልሻለሁ።
So Jesus has promised to Mary that those who believe in you
Aksum, the holy city of Ethiopia, dating back over 2,000 years, and the cradle of Ethiopian civilization with the Aksumite kingdom. We view the tallest and the largest obelisk made out of a single piece of stone standing anywhere in the world. We visited also the empty tombs of these former rulers of the Aksumite kingdom. Most famous in Aksum is the side church of St. Mary, which Ethiopians believe holds the precious item of the Ark of the Covenant. And for so many years, kings were crowned on this coronation stone. If Aksum had any historical figure, it would have to be the Queen of Sheba. Aksumites look at her formal pool as sacred ground. Her two-story palace is barely recognizable and stands outside the city, now to be viewed by tourists. And the entryway is marked by these grand granite steps. Outside the palace is a graveyard for slaves of the kingdoms past. Early the next morning, we geared up for a long day's drive and stopped along the way to a 5th century BC pagan temple. Alongside this ancient temple is an Ethiopian Orthodox church. We were greeted by its local priests who showed us the church's treasury and shared a bit of its history with us. All along this adventure, we encountered the hospitality of Ethiopia's children and young teens. As we ventured to climb this 4th century Orthodox semi-monolithic church, these teens were here to help us up this steep mountain. We were greeted with great hospitality, and we drank some local homebrew beer and ate some great bread with spices. But what impressed us the most was this church. We descend now into the Afar region, a place that is below sea level and stands second in line as the lowest place on earth, next to the Dead Sea in Israel. Camel caravans carrying salt blocks coming in from the salt mines, and children greeting visitors can be seen. We soon now drive out along the salt flats before evening sets in. The sun greets us early in the morning as we awake from our wicker beds from sleeping outside under the stars that stared at us all night. It was truly an amazing experience. We head now back out to the salt flats to see more of this amazing seabed of salt that stretches for hundreds of miles, and to catch another glimpse of the camel caravans headed into town loaded up for their 2-day trek to the salt factory. Once again, we get into our trusty Toyota Land Cruiser and head down the salt flat to something that has to be experienced to believe. It's like we were on another planet. The hot springs of Dalal were something to behold. Composed of different minerals along with sulfurs and potash, they create a spectacular array of color and contours. And Dalal is also renowned as being the hottest inhabited place on Earth. Recently, along the salt flat of Dalal, an opening occurred that reveals an underwater basin. The high salt content shows itself in the emerald colors. An amazing, picturesque place for sure that gathered a number of people. Traveling further down the road, we find the salt workers doing their daily duty of cutting and forming out of the ancient salt seabed blocks to be loaded upon the ready camels. We are now readying ourselves for the peak experience of this adventure. Our trucks are packed and ready. We now fuel our stomachs for the long drive through the Afar region to the Erta Ali volcano. Driving on paved road is short-lived, as soon we will hit the sand of this desert region. Our drivers seem to have an idea of where they're going, but there are no road signs, and you are left to your own instinct, it seems, as to how to get to the base camp. There she is, beautiful and majestic. This is a shield volcano that is wide, but not terribly steep. It's large and has a wide profile. And it's called a shield volcano to resemble the shield of a warrior. In just a moment, our camels will soon be readied by our guides who will lead us up at dusk. At base camp, we took refuge in these small grass huts, similar to the ones we will sleep in on top of Verteale pretty soon. As we get closer to the summit, we can see the red glow coming from the caldera of the volcano. Looking now into the caldera, the lava lake is just now visible. The sulfur gases that pour out can give one an upset stomach, as we both soon felt. Ethiopia currently has 60 named, active, and extinct volcanoes, but this one is the most famous and most visited. Other sounds coming from that hole right there. It's a vent. It's time now to head back and fly to the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. Ethiopia is majestic on so many levels. Its religious claim and geographic location make it worth the whole while to travel here. But more than anything, it's the people. In 2016, Ethiopia earned a new moniker, the Land of Origins. This nickname serves as its official tourism motto. It's home to 9 UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Ethiopia's human ancestors are its claim to history, most especially Lucy, the name given to the 3.2 million year old female hominid found in the Afar region of Ethiopia. From its kings and kingdoms, from its religious identity and its rock church, from the heights of the Simien Mountains to the lowlands of the Donegal Depression with its salt flats and majestic Ertaale, as the originator of the Arabica bean with its dark roast coffee, Ethiopia is a proud country with a proud people. Thank you for joining me on this great adventure.